The desert morning always began quietly, as if creation took a slow breath before letting the day unfold. Moses stepped out of the tent while a band of soft gold was just beginning to form along the horizon. The cool air brushed over his skin, carrying the smell of dust and dried grass that clung to the sheep gathered nearby. He had lived enough years in Midian for these mornings to settle into him like an old song. Nothing rushed here. Nothing pushed forward. Life moved with a steady rhythm of hooves on sand and wind, weaving through rocks. He tightened his cloak and walked toward the flock, letting the wooden staff tap gently against the ground, a familiar sound that always seemed to calm the animals. They lifted their heads as he approached, bleating with sleepy voices. Moses guided them out with practiced ease, his movements slow and sure, the routine so ingrained that he could follow it even while his mind wandered. Yet today something tugged at him beneath the surface, a faint pull he couldn't explain, as if the desert itself whispered for him to come further than he usually went. Zipporah watched him from the tent door, the shawl wrapped around her shoulders fluttering slightly in the early wind. She had long learned to read the lines on Moses's face, the way his thoughts sometimes weighed heavier than his words. There were parts of him she knew well, the gentle patience, the quiet humor, the tenderness he showed their children. But there were deeper layers too, places where his eyes drifted to distant memories he rarely spoke aloud. Egypt lived inside him like a sealed chamber. She never pushed, yet she sensed those hidden years shaped everything that came after. Moses led the flock further into the open land. The sun slowly climbed, warming the sand beneath his feet. The desert stretched wide in every direction, endless in its silence. He moved through it like a man who had come to understand its unspoken language. The rocks, the sparse patches of brush, the patterns of wind across the ground, none of it seemed empty to him. It was the world that had taught him to breathe again after Egypt had chased the breath from his chest. Yet that subtle pull within him grew. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't loud. It was steady, like a hand on his back, guiding him toward the distant slopes of Horeb. He had wandered near the mountain before, but never toward its base with purpose. It stood tall in the distance, its ridges sharp against the brightening sky, a silent witness carved from ancient stone. Moses didn't quicken his pace, but his steps naturally angled toward it, as though something unseen had marked that path just for today. As he drew nearer, the land began to change. The ground rose unevenly, ridges breaking through the sand. The air shimmered with growing heat. The sheep spread out to graze in small pockets of scrub, their faint bells ringing softly in the quiet. Moses stepped between rocks, adjusting the strap of his cloak across his shoulder. His breathing had settled into an easy rhythm when something ahead caught his eye, just a glint at first, a flicker that didn't match the light around it. He paused, narrowing his gaze. The flicker came again, brighter this time, but not like sunlight bouncing off stone. It held a movement of its own, a pulse. Moses took a few steps forward, curiosity sharpening into something stronger. As he rounded a bend in the rocky path, he saw it clearly. A bush was burning. The flame wrapped the branches fully, steady and bright, not wild like desert fires that devoured everything in their reach. This fire clung to the bush the way light clings to dawn, illuminating every thorn and leaf without consuming a single one. Moses stopped breathing for a moment, stunned by the impossible sight. Fire in the desert was familiar, but not like this. This fire held its shape with intention. He moved closer, drawn not by impulsiveness, but by something deeper, something that rose from his chest rather than his mind. He felt warmth coming from the flame, yet the heat was gentle, not the biting sting of a blaze fed by dry brush. His heart beat harder with each step. He couldn't understand it, yet he couldn't turn away either. Instinct made him slip off his sandals. The ground under his feet felt different, cooler, steadier, almost aware. He approached slowly, every sense sharpened, until he stood near enough to see the flame's movement reflected in his own eyes. It swayed and curled, alive in a way that felt purposeful, almost like it breathed. The flame shifted, and the air tightened. A voice rose within the fire, steady as the ground beneath his feet, yet deeper than any sound Moses had ever heard. Moses. The name didn't echo. It sank into him, as if it had always belonged to this moment. Moses. Moses's breath caught. His knees weakened beneath the weight of the call. Do not come closer. The place where you stand is holy ground. Then the air around him changed. Not in temperature, not in sound, in presence. Something ancient settled into the space around him, not entering suddenly, but revealing itself as if it had been there all along, waiting for him to notice. Moses felt it press into his awareness with a depth that made his chest tighten. It wasn't a force pushing him back. It wasn't a weight crushing him. It was something far greater than either. It was as though the desert, the sky, and the breath in his lungs all bowed to a reality older than creation. His thoughts scattered under the magnitude of it. He stood completely still, unable to look away from the flame that showed no sign of dying. The presence wrapped around him with a kind of knowing that left no corner of him hidden. It reached into every memory he had tried to bury, pulling them to the surface with quiet precision. He saw his mother's desperate hands, the basket sealed with pitch, the river carrying him where no child should survive, the halls of Pharaoh's palace, cold and carved from stone, a body falling into sand that Moses himself had disturbed, fear, running, years of silence, years of trying to bury the man he once had been. The presence did not accuse him. It did not condemn. It simply held him in truth. And in that truth, Moses felt his knees weaken. The memories faded as another vision rose before him with startling clarity. It was not of his own past, but of a people whose pain had never left the ears of the one who now revealed himself in flame. Moses saw them as if he stood among them. Hebrew men bent beneath the weight of stones cut for monuments they would never walk inside. Their backs streaked from whips that fell with cruel repetition. Women kneaded flour with hands cracked from labor, whispering exhausted comfort to children who watched suffering as if it were part of the day's routine. Old men sat in shadows, their breath shallow, carrying a lifetime of disappointment in eyes that once held the promise of freedom. The cries of these people, Moses's people, moved through him like a current too strong to resist. Their anguish pressed into his chest until he felt his breath hitch. He understood in that moment that the one in the flame was not distant, not indifferent, not silent. Every cry had been heard. Every stolen hour of life, every bruise, every fading dream. The voice rose again, woven through the fire. I have seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries. I know their suffering. Moses felt the words pressing into the deepest parts of him. Not accusation, but compassion sharpened into purpose. And now, the voice continued, I have come down to deliver them. Moses had thought he was alone in caring about them, that his anger in Egypt was just a spark born from his own restless identity. But now he saw the truth. The spark had come from a fire far greater than him. Now go, the voice commanded, firm but patient. I am sending you to Pharaoh. You will bring my people out of Egypt. Moses trembled at the weight of it, fear rising fast, but the fire did not retreat. I will be with you. The presence unfolded another truth within him, one he had spent a lifetime avoiding. He would return to Egypt, not as a fugitive, not as a man trying to outrun his past, but as a chosen vessel for a deliverance that had been promised long before he touched desert sand. The path he had fled would become the path he must now walk again, with none of the certainty he once thought defined bravery. It would demand more of him than he believed he possessed. Fear rose from deep within him, thick and cold. It filled his mind with every reason the task made no sense. He was old. His voice stumbled when he needed it to hold steady. His past was stained with failure and blood. He carried no influence, no army, no authority. And the people he once tried to defend had not seen him for decades. Why would they trust him now? But the flame remained unwavering, its glow steady, as though it breathed with a patience that expected nothing except honesty. Moses felt that patience settled over him like warm light. The one who called him did not pretend his fear didn't exist. Instead, the presence filled the space around his doubt with something stronger, certainty that did not depend on Moses at all. For the first time, he realized that the call was not rooted in his strength, but in the identity of the one who spoke to him through fire. The plan did not hinge on Moses being capable. It hinged on the one who had chosen him being unshakable. The divine name settled over him then, a revelation that felt less like information and more like a shift in the foundation of reality. It did not describe God. It declared him. And the fire spoke one more time, not loud, not overwhelming, but with a stillness that carried eternity inside it. I am who I am. Tell the people, I am has sent me to you. A name shaped by existence itself. A name that did not need a beginning or an explanation. A name that was presence, being, life, the eternal now. Moses felt it move through him like fire that purified without burning, anchoring him in something far stronger than anything he had known in the courts of Pharaoh or the quiet fields of Midian. Signs followed, not as spectacle, but as reassurance. His staff became something alive with command, as if creation itself recognized the authority behind its purpose. His own hand, marked with age and labor, changed and returned at the direction of the presence. Water from the river that had once carried him as an infant transformed in ways no man could explain. Each sign was a thread, woven into a tapestry of trust, a reminder that the one who called him would not leave him to face what lay ahead alone. When the encounter eased and the flame remained, but the weight lifted, Moses felt as though the world around him had shifted slightly, as if the ground held different meaning beneath his feet. The desert was still the desert, the same rocks, the same wind, the same quiet, yet nothing inside him was the same. His heart carried a fire now, not bright or overwhelming, but steady, like a flame sheltered cupped between protective hands. He slipped his sandals back on slowly, almost reluctantly, as though stepping away from the fire felt like leaving warmth he did not fully understand. His legs trembled slightly as he stood. The staff in his hand felt different, heavier with purpose, but lighter with certainty. He looked at the bush one last time. The flame still moved, calm and unchanging, a reminder that the one who had spoken would remain present even when the mountain was far behind him. The walk back to camp was quieter than the walk to Horeb, though the world around him was the same. Moses felt the weight of the mission settle onto his shoulders, not crushing him, but shaping him. Every step seemed to pulse with tension between fear and obedience. He didn't yet know how he would stand before Pharaoh, how he would speak with a voice that often failed him, or how he would persuade the Hebrews to believe that freedom could exist again. But he knew he could not ignore the call. The presence had marked him, not with force, but with truth that did not allow retreat. Zipporah noticed the change before Moses even reached the camp. She saw it in his posture, in the set of his shoulders, in the quiet intensity in his eyes. He carried something she could not see, but could feel, a burden held with reverence rather than reluctance. She understood that he would speak when he found the words, so she met him with silence full of trust rather than questions. When he finally told Jethro of the encounter, the old man listened with the calm attention of someone who understood the weight of sacred moments. Jethro placed a hand on Moses' arm, not to reassure him but to steady him, offering a blessing shaped by years of walking with God in ways quieter than fire, but no less real. The blessing did not make the path easier, but it made Moses feel less alone. They prepared to leave Midian in the glow of early morning, the sun stretching across the sky like a promise. Moses tightened the straps, securing supplies to the donkey. Zipporah stood beside him, her expression calm, yet shadowed with the ache of uncertainty. Their children clutched small belongings, unaware of the magnitude of the journey ahead. Moses touched his son's hair gently, feeling how unsteady he was under the weight of leaving. But he understood now that obedience sometimes carried grief with it, and the presence that spoke in flame would not abandon them in the wilderness of unknown futures. As they moved deeper into the desert, days blurred into a rhythm shaped by heat, silence, and long stretches of thought. Moses walked with a heaviness in his chest that had nothing to do with age. He wrestled with the task before him, replaying every moment at the burning bush. At night, he lay beneath the expanse of stars, each one gleaming like an ancient witness to covenants made with his ancestors. The presence felt near even then, quiet and sure, shaping his thoughts with a patience he had never known from himself. The desert stretched for miles ahead until finally, at the end of one long day, Moses saw a shape moving in the distance, a figure walking toward him. The silhouette was slow, carrying years in its stride, the head bowed slightly as if deep in concentration. Moses squinted against the fading light, trying to make out more details. As the figure drew closer, recognition struck him with a force he didn't expect. Aaron, his brother, his blood, a link to a past Moses had never fully escaped. They stopped a few steps from each other, the desert holding its breath around them. Time folded between them, decades shrinking into the space of a heartbeat. No words rose. They weren't needed. Moses saw in Aaron's eyes the mixture of weariness and hope carried by those who had remained in Egypt. Aaron saw in Moses the depth of a calling shaped by flame. They embraced with the strength of men who had lived separate lives marked by different wounds, yet bound by the same story. When they pulled back, their breaths steadied, and they turned toward Egypt together. The desert behind them held silence. The road ahead held history. And Moses walked with the sense that the fire from Horeb had begun to move through more than just him. Moses and Aaron walked as evening settled over the land, their shadows long on the sand. The desert wind brushed against them, carrying faint traces of river and distant fields that marked the edge of Egypt. Moses felt the weight of return pressing into him, heavier with each step, not as fear alone, but as the recognition that the place he had fled was now the place he was being sent toward. The presence from the mountain did not fade. It remained quiet but steady, as if walking beside him, shaping each step with a purpose he was still learning to trust. As the land softened into cultivated fields, the sounds of labor reached them, dull thuds, strained voices, the grind of carts across hardened ground. Egypt looked unchanged, yet the suffering felt sharper to Moses than it ever had. Families passed them with weary eyes, bodies thin from work that drained more than physical strength. Some looked at Moses and Aaron with faint curiosity before letting their gaze fall again. Hope was expensive here, and no one gave it away quickly. Aaron led Moses into the gathering place where the elders met at day's end. They stood in a loose circle, shoulders bent, faces worn by years, lived under the weight of Pharaoh's demands. When Moses stepped into their midst, the settlement's noise seemed to dim. He spoke quietly, letting the story rise in full, steady lines, the fire that burned without consuming, the presence that had filled the air with more truth than he could carry alone, the God who had heard their cries and stepped into a bush on a lonely mountain to begin their deliverance. He did not speak as a hero or a man returned to reclaim something he once lost. He spoke as a witness to a moment that reshaped him from the inside out. When he showed the signs he had been given, the elders' expressions shifted. Their skepticism loosened, not replaced by certainty, but by the fragile recognition that something sacred was moving again. Slowly, one elder knelt, then another, until the ground was lined with men bowing not to Moses, but to the God whose presence had broken years of silence. That night, whispers moved through the settlement. Families repeated the story, the name of the God of their fathers, spoken with careful, trembling hope. Moses lay awake long after the village quieted, the staff near his hand, his thoughts circling what awaited him in Pharaoh's halls. He felt his own frailty, but he also felt the steady truth the fire had planted in him. The God who had held a thorn bush in flame without turning it to ash could also hold an aging shepherd through the weight of a task he could never carry alone. Morning would bring confrontation. Moses would stand before a king who believed himself unchallengeable. He would speak words that would fracture the confidence of an empire and awaken a people who had lived too long without light. The path ahead would be marked by resistance and miracles, by nights of doubt and days of revelation, but all of it traced back to Horeb, to the still burning fire that had called him not to greatness, but to obedience. The night around him seemed to hold its breath. Pharaoh slept in the security of his walls. The Hebrews slept in the weariness of their chains. But Moses slept with the weight of a flame that would soon spread through the land in ways no king could prevent. The deliverance of Israel had begun not with armies or power, but with a single bush that burned without consuming, and a man who finally listened when God called his name.